Donna Gould, everybody. Milk it, milk it.
I think I'm a piker. I've been doing this a long time. Huh?
Well, good to see you.
Thanks for having
and
me on.
Congratulations for the show. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's. I'm really happy. It only took 30 years in the business.
Yeah.
To come up with the most obvious idea I've ever had. But yeah, it's doing really well. And today is just one of those days that everything happened. I have a new album that came out today, comedy album.
Yeah.
Came out today. It's not really an album.
Mm-hmm.
It's a download.
Right.
And you used to say that my album is out, and now they say my download has dropped. But that sounds like something that would happen to Grandpa at the last Thanksgiving he's ever invited to.
Yeah. So there's no physical copies.
There's no physical copies. There might be a vinyl release later because I'm always looking for ways to lose money.
Yeah.
But it's called Mr. Funny Man, and it's on everything.
Now you must have grown up with comedy albums, right?
I did, yeah. It was a huge part of my childhood.
Yeah.
I'm from Massachusetts, and we were a big George Carlin household. Mm-hmm. And I have older brothers, and so yeah, we had all the Carlin albums, all the Cheech and Chong albums, and then when I got to be about 12, 13, Steve Martin, that's when he first broke.
Right.
And I had all of that stuff. So that's why, and I find, like, in terms of having a special versus having an album, it's fun to have a special, and it's fun to be on a billboard down by the airport for 4 days. But it's also, I find that the album lives longer, because it's serious, basically.
Right.
That people will go back and re-listen to an album, or they'll hear you on the radio. People tend not to sit down and watch a special again.
Right.
And we will listen to an album again.
And it also is just an unbelievably different experience to listen to stand up as opposed to watch it. I remember being a kid, being just like amazed, like my imagination just flew. Like, not only who was this guy, but who are the people who somehow knew where this thing was?
Yeah, that's true.
You know,
how do they know? I wanted to go.
Yeah,
and to hear it, like like a great Richard Pryor album, and then to see like live in concert or something,
right?
Which for my dollar is the finest example of, like, if an alien came here and said, like, what stand-up comedy, I would show them Richard Pryor live in concert and go, like, well, that's as good as we can do it. And to see that, they're different experiences.
Yeah, but yeah, there is a kind of a Sergeant Pepper about that, right? Like, we're not going to be able,
in the sense that he was on a lot of acid at the time.
Yes.
Probably, yes.
Yeah. And actually,
there is. That's pretty much the peak of the mountain.
Yeah. And actually, Richard did more drugs than all four Beatles. So
that's true. Yeah,
that was something to be proud of. But I also think, like, that is where we went from, like, okay, it's a show business career to it's an art form. Let's see how far you can push yourself, torture yourself to be a comedian.
I think it was a movement. I think Lenny Bruce did it before his time and suffered the consequences. And I think that he was one of the first stand-ups to really elevate it to an art form. I used to say that in the evolutionary chart of show business, where opera singers and ballet stars are here, the comedians are right here, right in front of the guy that fluffs the donkey. Way down there, and that tunes up the clown car. He was one of the first people to really elevate it into an art form. It can be, but it's a gutter art form, and those are my favorite kinds. It's a folk art. It's not.
But do you think that, like if you look at a Jerry Seinfeld, people are almost like, but he didn't suffer enough for this. You know what I mean? Like, yeah.
No, I'm not saying he didn't suffer enough. I'm not saying he didn't suffer enough, although clearly he didn't. It's different kinds of things. It's like, I love. You can love the blues and you can love pop. It's just the kind of thing. Jerry Seinfeld says on his new special, he stands in front of his house and he goes, "This is the house I grew up in. If I was raised in Peoria by a pimp and a prostitute, would I have been funnier? Maybe. This is what I had to work with."
Right.
So I think he's self-aware of it. And, out of comedy comes the kind of comedy that I like and that I do comes out of pain and the lesser enviable human emotions, because I just think that it's better to laugh about that stuff. It comes to me more naturally. It's also an Irish thing, maybe. So I always gravitate towards that more. It's just different. It's different tastes.
And Carlin did bring in that Irish Catholic type comedy. It kind of really, that was the first time. I remember being a kid hearing like Class Clown and having him bring up the church, and I'd never heard that before.
And it's interesting too, because he had both careers. He was a very traditional, straight-laced, supper club show business comic. He had wore a suit and he had a haircut and and was clean shaven. And around 67, 68, he just like, I can't do this anymore. And he became an artist. He went from being an entertainer and became an artist. And he was the guy that I grew up with. And I really, and it's funny, I had a very boisterous household. 4 brothers, a sister, 2 parents, 1 4-bedroom house with 1 toilet. Which is why I developed a habit that I had to be broken of, like well into my 20s, where you would announce that you're going to the bathroom. Because if you only have one toilet and you have 6 people in the house, like you have to say in case somebody else has to go, like I'm peeing. But wait, let me go first. And I was like went through college and I was living with some people in a house in Boston, and like you don't have to tell us when you go to the toilet. Learn behavior, but. Yeah, he was. It was funny whenever George Carlin would be. There were a couple of things George Carlin would be on TV, and everybody would shut up and watch it.
Sure,
it was one of those things.
Yeah, that was always when there wasn't comedy everywhere. When you found out like Rickles was going to be on the Tonight Show or Carlin, you were just like, "Holy shit!"
Yeah, you go get the TV Guide and look for the TV Guide. Yeah.
Or if you were lucky enough that one of them co-hosted Mike Douglas for a week, you suddenly like, I got to get home.
You got to get home by 4. Right? Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, and it was so funny when Jerry Lewis passed away. I went down a big Jerry Lewis rabbit hole on YouTube, and I was watching the Jerry Lewis roast from 1968, and Don Rickles was on, and it was not only hilarious, nothing he said you could say today.
Right.
Nothing out of his mouth.
Yeah.
His first joke was, Jerry, I know we're here roasting you and it's all fun and games, but I have to say, Jerry, from the bottom of my heart, you're a Jew. Okay. People going, but he had one joke that really was just a genuinely funny joke. It was such a genuinely funny joke. When Jerry's a clown, and there are a lot of great clowns. Emmett Kelly. That's about it. So funny.
And those guys were really alone at that point doing comedy. I mean, there was, a couple dozen people?
Yeah. It was, you were mostly opening acts.
Like
the real traditional showbiz guys, you would like go out on the road with, the Four Seasons or, whoever, and you'd open for them.
And so even from an early age, this was a dream of yours.
Yeah, I wanted to be a stand-up comic from when I was about, 13, 14. And I started when I was 17.
But I also heard you say
you were when I was 30.
Right. But, that's also, like you said, that same thing with Carlin. There has to be craft before there's art. You know what I mean?
Well,
like you have to really...
And I think with any, like a musician or a sculptor or a painter, you're not going to do anything worthwhile until you know who you are.
Right.
And I don't think anybody knows who they are until they get in their late 20s, early 30s, and you've just kind of made your mistakes. I had the joy of... I was working in Boston when I started out in the 80s, working in Boston and the comedies scene there. It was like the Wild West. It was like everybody was getting paid in cash. Everybody was on massive amounts of coke. And I was just literally a child. I was 18 years old with no social skills whatsoever. I would have killed me if I knew me.
Right.
I must have been totally insufferable. But I was good. Technically. I didn't have anything to talk about, but I was technically good. And I worked a lot because I didn't do drugs and I had a car.
Yeah.
So people say, great, well, Dana will drive you to the gig and you don't have to give him any blow.
Yes.
And so I worked all the time. Everybody loved me. And it was, looking back on it now, it was just such a different era.
But an amazing scene to come out of when.
Yeah, you had to be good.
Yeah.
You really those crowds in the 80s, they were tough, and you had to really go out and grab them by the throat and stand on them, or you were dead.
But I think Barry...
It's a port city.
Yeah.
It's a port city.
When Barry Crimmins kind of set that up early on, it was, here's what I expect out of you. There's no hack jokes. There's no ripping off other comics.
Yeah.
And because of that, it seems like there's still generations of great comedians coming out of Boston.
You're right, and that is what he did. And Barry was one of those people that vigorously hated me when I was a child. But for which I don't blame him, and with whom now I'm very good friends. It's like, yes, when you were 21, you were hard to be around. I understand. I understand.
So, who were some of the people that you broke in? Who was all part of that scene?
In Boston, it was Crimmins, Bob Goldthwait, Dennis Leary was around, and then the big local guys, Steve Sweeney, Don Gavin. Then I moved to San Francisco, and I came up with Jake Johansson. Some people named John Ross, became friends with Robin Williams at a really weird early time in my career. And then I moved down to L.A. And when I moved to L.A. in the late 80s, two weird things happened. I became very good friends with a comedian that I was just texting with, a guy named Kevin Rooney. Mm-hmm. And Kevin was part of that. It was like Jay Leno, Jerry Seinfeld, Bill Maher, Kevin Rooney, Larry Miller, Richard Lewis. All those guys, they came out of New York in the mid '80s, and they all moved to L.A. and they were all a gang out there. And Kevin was basically a writer, but he was a brilliant stand-up when he did stand-up. But he was a writer for Jay and for Dennis Miller and all that gang. So I was Kevin's friend. He was sort of like older brother to me, and he took me around, and I hung out with all of those people, and would go to their house with Kevin, and then I would go on the road, and they would ask me to middle for them, and I would go out on the road and middle. So I knew all those guys that I just mentioned thought of me as like, well, he's one of our gang.
Yeah.
And then just behind me were the people that came up behind me from San Francisco that were my age, but didn't start as early as I had, like Patton Oswalt, Brian Posehn, Blaine Capatch, David Cross, all that group.
Yeah.
And I was a part of that group because they were my age, and we went to the same concerts, and we did. So I was sort of like in between these two generations of comics. And so when we started doing alternative comedy, I could go and do those shows, but then I could also go to the Improv and work with Leno.
Right.
I was going in between two sort of groups, and it was nice to have kind of a foot in both sides. But it was also a little confusing.
Sure, right. Because you're going on one side, this kind of what kind of started in the 80s kind of stuff is your bread and butter. That's what you know. But at the same time, you wanted to experiment a little bit.
Yeah, in the alternative scene that I was there in Los Angeles in the beginning, with Ginny Garofalo and David Cross and Kathy Griffin and all of us, was just, you go to the Improv and you would try out new material, and then they go, oh, the guy from The Tonight Show was there and he saw you didn't do well. Like, well, yeah, I was trying out new material. Of course I didn't do well. Yeah. That's why it's called the Improv, because we're supposedly flying by the seat of our pants. So we wanted to do comedy in places where we could bomb if we had to, and to try out new stuff. And I remember very strange. I saw Elvis Costello at the Universal Amphitheater, which is now Harry Potter Town. And I was looking at all those people. I was like, why aren't these people coming to our comedy shows? These are the people that are our age.
Right.
But by that time, they weren't going to comedy shows. So we started going into these little hipster coffee places. There was one place called Big and Tall Books, a place called Largo. We just went to where our friends were and just started foisting shows upon them. And there was a rule that you couldn't do any material that you hadn't done before. It had to be new. So you wrote it that day, and then you would have to bring your notebook on stage with you because you didn't know it yet. And that was the birth of bringing your notebook on stage
Right.
with you. That later somehow got perverted into don't memorize your act. I was never a part of that. It is a job. You should learn it. It's nothing to be ashamed of. But that was the. And then I would go to the Improv and hang out with like Kevin and Bill Maher and those people, and they would bringing notebooks on stage. What are the kids doing? And I was like, I felt like the hippie hanging out with the jazz guys. Hey, come on, man, we're all groovy. It's like I was just going back and forth. It was very schizophrenic.
But let's say at Largo there was always still the music mixed in. And out, right?
I think that's best. I think I don't like comedy as every dish on the plate.
Right.
It's the side meal better.
Yeah.
Largo was my favorite place to perform.
Still to this.
I there on the 29th of October.
Yeah. But that was for you at that point in your career with this fun times, exciting times. You're like, why?
Oh, it was great. It was. I didn't really go. I mean, I went to college, but I didn't have a college experience because I was already doing stand up.
Right.
So I was taking classes, and then I was going out at night and doing shows around Massachusetts. I didn't care about any of that stuff.
Yeah.
And I really wanted to be a comedian. And so I didn't have a college experience. And it wasn't until I moved to LA in the early 90s and my social circle sort of congealed with, Janine, Bob Odenkirk, David Cross, the whole Ben Stiller show group. That was my college. Like that was when we would go to everybody was at somebody's house every night. We would go to, we all went to the same parties. We all went to the same concerts. We all went to the same movies. We sort of moved in a pack, and it was really a beautiful time. And I didn't realize it at the time, of course, but that was sort of like my college years. Yeah.
Yeah. But it is
because I was on stage, I was pulling way more chicks than a person who looks like me should have.
Obviously, somehow still works. No one understands why, but it does.
Let's be honest.
He was
I look
I
look like a toe.
Yeah.
I know what I'm playing with. But somehow
he was
it works.
just up there. Now he's down here. That's great.
Exactly.
Yeah.
My God, he's short. Yeah.
But even if you could say that,
George Carlin once said that any woman who sleeps with a comedian is like somebody who sees an organ grinder and fucks the monkey.
No one said they weren't broken, but they're
apologies to my girlfriend.
Yeah.
Apologies to my girlfriend, which is another one of the expression like girlfriend. Like I'm an adult.
Yeah.
I'm divorced. I have children. I'm an adult. I'm in a very serious relationship with a lovely woman. She's not my girlfriend.
Right.
She's a woman, but. Woman friend again.
Yes, that's odd.
Sounds like somebody Grandpa has to take to dinner if the machine fails. It's like, Grandpa's going to bring his woman friend because he can't keep anything down. Celia, Grandpa's blue. Yeah, I don't know what to call it.
Now, we're talking about like when you're that young and you're having fun. The weird thing that happens to kids still today is they don't see how cool it is because they're so amped for the next step and stand up.
Yeah.
Or
that was me at the time.
Show business acceptance.
That was me at the time.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But if you even you said Jerry's last thing, he goes back to that time where this was great.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He's got $10 billion right now, but it's going, hey, this might.
He lost $50 billion.
Yes. Sad. He's a gambler. Jerry's a gambler.
Jerry has a great thing where he eats wood pulp and throws up money.
But that is odd that we missed that at the time. Everybody.
Yeah, that's true. But I think that's also just the human nature. You don't realize it's great at the time.
Yeah.
There's nothing worse than that guy in high school who is like, this is it, guys.
Yeah, right.
Ugh.
Yeah.
Usually he's still doing it 30 years later.
Yeah.
He's the guy who drive through town and like, oh God, it's him. I can't.
He's waiting for everybody to come back.
Yeah. Matthew McConaughey in that one movie. Oh God, what was that one? He plays that character so well.
Dazed and Confused.
Yes. He plays that character so perfectly in that movie.
And that guy's probably still there.
Sure.
Probably still dating high school girls.
Yep. Yep. Well, now that Hef's gone, somebody has to take over.
Well,
I was thinking that Hugh Hefner's girlfriend, somewhere in L.A., there's an 18-year-old woman who had an abusive relationship with her parents, and she moved out and was dating Hugh Hefner, and now she doesn't have a boyfriend anymore, and she's just trying to take her mind off it, so maybe she turns on the TV, but it's just watching a movie, but it's Halloween, so it's like the mummy's on. She sees the mummy come up out of the coffin, and she just thinks, God, I see him everywhere I look.
Now, you're a kid who also loved horror. That's how this horror and comedy thing came together for you. But
it's true. I finally found a niche.
Yeah. But you also had said before that you were an anxious kid, and I always was wondering why anybody would like to be scared. What is that feeling?
Well, to be somewhat serious, I was a train wreck of a child, really high-strung emotionally, full of anxiety. Grew up in a very chaotic environment. Never had a lot of emotional stability, and loved. And as I said, I have 4 older brothers. All my brothers hunted, played sports, are big athletes. My dad, same thing. I liked Star Trek and horror movies. And my father, at the time, you have to realize this is the 70s, couldn't reconcile the fact that I didn't want to play sports, that I didn't want to go hunting, but I was straight.
Right.
Couldn't see how that figured out, And I talked about this often with my live-in male companion. No, I'm kidding. But it was just like, it was a very nobody saw. I didn't feel like anyone saw me, and it was not great. That's why I'm funny. But what I think that the horror movies did was you get excited, and I actually think it acted like Ritalin. I think that the increased adrenaline that you get counteracted the anxiety, and I think that actually it made me feel better watching it.
That's really interesting.
My daughter takes Ritalin, and I was really against it. I was really against it, and you know what? She's much better on it. She's better at school. She's better at sports. It just levels out that stuff, and I think that that's what it did. And also, there's when you're a kid, horror movies. Like the old horror movies that I grew up watching, the old black and white ones, you relate to the monster because the monster's like you. He's an outcast that everybody's afraid of. And she's like, yeah, I get that. That. Yeah.
So that actually was like, okay, here's something scary. I already see the world is scary.
Yeah.
Maybe here's a way of
I was obsessed with Planet of the Apes, and somebody said, yeah, because there was this guy trapped in this world that was totally upside down to him. I was like, I knew exactly how he felt.
Yeah.
I was like, I didn't, I had a gun cabinet in my bedroom when I was a kid. I woke up and the first thing I saw was 8 rifles because it was the only room in the house that the gun cabinet fit in. And I was I'm not lying, and none of this is a lie. And I was just like, and I just wake up and like, oh yeah, just guns everywhere. Okay. I remember this is a true story. I have a great relationship with them. I mean, this is all in the past. I have a great relationship with my parents now. And, you realize that they are who they are, and they did the best that they could.
Sure.
Doesn't speak well of their abilities. But I was dating a woman who lived in San Francisco whose father ran the local NBC affiliate. And they had this big house in Marin. And I remember being at their house, and some kind of famous guy came over to talk to his dad, and I was like, called my parents, like, I'm at this crazy rich person's house in Mill Valley, and this guy knows somebody who was famous. I can't remember who it was, and my mother just goes, well, your brother shot a deer today, but he winged it. He only caught it by its ear, so your father chased it and grabbed it by its antlers and drowned it. Okay. Right. Okay then.
Yeah.
You win. I got to get back to earth,
right,
as they say.
But even when we were talking about those show business, like you're excited to see, did that at least bring you guys together, or were you on your own seeing if Carlin was going to be on TV that night? Did they get?
They got that. Yeah, Carlin was one of the. That's what I was saying, and it was like that was the thing that we all liked.
Right.
Clint Eastwood movies, George Carlin, a couple other things, James Bond movies. Those are the things that we all agreed we liked, and not surprisingly, those are things that I still have a lot of great love for.
Right, because that's your one connection.
We're all
together.
Yeah, and we still, it's the same thing. We're all grown adults now. And we, I'm the only member of my family that did not vote for Donald Trump. I'm the only, and so we just don't talk about it, but we can talk about who was on Andy Griffith today, who, it's like we still have that stuff.
That's fun. Me and my family still talk politics. Either way.
We can't do it.
Yeah.
No, that's not going to happen.
Now, what was school like for you? Because you're a funny kid, or
I was really, and everybody in my family's really funny, and I was a pretty funny kid. Yeah, and that there was in where I grew up in Massachusetts in the 70s and 80s, there were the jocks and what we would call the burnouts, which are the druggy kids. And then there's this small clique that was in the middle that made fun of both of them, and that was me and my two friends.
Right. But teachers never catch on to comedy talent, when it's not like
I had two that did.
Yeah.
In fact, the first time I did stand-up comedy, I was 2 weeks after I graduated high school. I was 17 years old, and I was driven into Boston to perform at open mic night at the Ding Ho.
Right.
With Lenny Clark, and it was my high school librarian and her husband.
Wow.
That said, no, you should do this. We'll bring you in.
That's really, really interesting. And now they'd be arrested for that very same thing.
And here's another thing that should have been creepy that isn't. One of my best friends in high school was a Catholic priest. We had this young priest in our parish, and I didn't. I was a altar boy out of so there'd be something to do on Saturday.
That's beautiful, by the way.
and we had a priest who had the parish van, and before my friends and I had driver's licenses, we'd go to the movies, we'd go get a pizza, we'd hang out, and greatest guy in the world.
Yeah.
Nope, straight shooter. Never a problem.
As far as you can remember.
As far as I can remember.
Yeah.
I have no memory of 1979, but I'm sure it's fine. They did later remove a wristwatch from. No, he was a super, super great guy, and always the bridesmaid, never the bride.
Yeah. But
too soon.
Yeah. But for a kid who grew up loving show business, right? Your career must be so fun because you're
awesome.
In the middle of so many things, and it's great if you keep that appreciation.
I do totally.
Yeah.
Every day I drive on Mulholland, which kills me. I grew up watching Dragnet.
Yeah.
It takes place in L.A. and I was like, I want to live there. I watch the Brady Bunch. I want to live there. That's where I live, and I never lost on that. And there are things like my favorite movies. Like one of my favorite movies of all time is my favorite movie of all time is Planet of the Apes.
Yeah.
Okay. So before until my divorce, I lived in Roddy McDowell's house. My wife and kids still do. I live up the street. I was like, I own Roddy McDowell's house. I don't live there. But no, it's not like that. And it's Roddy McDowell's house. And, I can go out to where Planet of the Apes was filmed. I found a chunk of the city in the dirt in Malibu Park. I love the movie Ed Wood. The guys that wrote it, Scott Alexander and Larry Karaszewski, who wrote The People versus O.J. Simpson, and all that, they're friends of mine. I love An American Werewolf in London. I worked with John Landis for a while. I never take that for granted. I never get bored of that. Yeah, I spent time with Mel Brooks last month.
That's pretty amazing. Huh?
Yeah, it was just
crazy. There's a guy who is still as funny as
terrifyingly intelligent.
Yeah,
he's literally he's 91, might be 92 now.
Yeah,
and it was just like the Russian Revolution, and he'll just go for
right,
the origins and effects of the Russian Revolution. And he's also met every single human being. We were talking about his movie High Anxiety, and he went, "You know what Hitchcock told me about that?" And I go, "Right,
yes, that makes sense.
You would have known him."
Yeah,
just crazy to me.
Also, the thing about Mel is the detail that he remembers every story.
Yeah.
I was talking to him about the show of shows once, and he went down and told me what everybody in the writing staff ordered for lunch on this particular day. And I'm like, this is like a one-man documentary wherever he's going.
That's funny.
But that's
that sounds like him.
Yeah, but that's the stuff that can kind of wake you up to your own story, to know that when you were a kid you loved something, and
totally.
now you're welcomed into that world.
I became friends with George Carlin. That was the thing that ended it for me. I couldn't believe it. We spoke on the phone from our houses. that to me. Nothing will top that. That was just like George Carlin called about something, and I called him back, and we talked about it. And that was just like, okay, I'm done.
Yeah,
I'm done. Yeah, that was that. And my wife and I, my wife was an agent, and she worked with Paul Rubens, Pee Wee Herman. Mm-hmm. And we went to see them at the Groundlings do this benefit show. And we said hello, and we were talking to him, and then we were leaving, and we just heard, "Good night, Dana. Good night, Sue." And we turned it was Paul Rubens. And I was just like, that's insane.
Yes.
That's insane.
My TV has walked out into my life. Yeah.
Yeah. And then not long after that, just to show how that generation won't appreciate it, they did the Pee Wee's Playhouse Live at the Nokia Theater, and we took our daughters, and then they went backstage and they met Paul, and it was very lovely. And then he came to our house about a month later for a charity benefit we had, and he walked in the door, and my daughter was about 6. She goes, "Pee Wee, come upstairs. I want to show you my room." Suddenly, I want to show you my room.
Yeah, I want to show.
No, you talk to them later.
Well, from the Simpsons, I know you got to know Albert Brooks, and when I was
he was my
that was the guy.
Yeah, he was the B-side to the Carlin thing. George Carlin was my comedy obsession when I was a kid and growing up. Once I became a comedian, and Albert Brooks was the guy that allowed me to become. George Carlin allowed me to become a comedian. Albert Brooks allowed me to become the comedian that I am.
Yeah.
He was the guy that I saw how the material itself was irrelevant, that it was him. It was the way he talked, the way he carried himself, his entire personage, that Carlin did not really have. Carlin was very literate. And I took both of those and combined them, and that's my shtick. But and Albert, and this is like Janine Garofalo and I were friends now, and we were just obsessed with him, Yeah. And then I got to meet him, which was crazy, and then to know him and to have him say my name. Like we were at a Simpsons party, and I was kind of looking at him out of the corner of my eye because I'd met him a couple of times, and then he just went, "Hello, Dana," and again, that was just like, God, this is crazy. This is so crazy. Yeah,
I'll give people like some of the albums or downloads now from and they're like, how did this even happen? I mean, he was doing stuff
so ahead of his time
that people don't even attempt now. The Stars Ball, where he's in a studio by himself doing a funnier album than people standing in.
And what's amazing about A Star Is Bought, for people that don't know, there used to be these albums that you'd sell in the 60s and 70s where it was like, act with Vincent Price.
Yeah.
And it would be a scene, and it would be Vincent Price doing half the scene, and then there would be a script in the album, and you would read the other scene, the other actor. I don't know who bought this.
Yeah,
because you can really only do it once.
This is the first time hearing it. I had no idea that happened.
That was the origin of that, and that was on Comedy -1.
Yeah,
Albert Brooks's first album. The second side of the album is all that. And it's the comedy team of Albert Brooks and you. And
it's unbelievable.
And then you get it, buy the album, and you get a script of a routine.
Yeah.
And then it's Albert going, "Well, hello, Joe." And you go, "Hi, Albert." And it's, "Well, and then it works. But if you really take the time to do it.
Yeah.
He starts leaving you less and less time to do your line. So there's a joke within the joke within the joke. Like there's like your line would be like, "Well, I have to bring the car to the garage tomorrow, or I can't go to work. What's going on? Well, I have to bring. Well, it doesn't matter." It's just madness. It's just the best.
I always remember that too, because it would be like, "Congratulations on your purchase of this album," and right away he's talking to you.
He's so
like he's a salesman.
He's so freakishly intelligent. We were at one of these parties, and he's a big Stanley Kubrick fan, and was friends of Stanley Kubrick, and because Stanley Kubrick loved the movie Modern Romance and told Albert that you made the movie about jealousy that I always wanted to make, and you did it. And they became somewhat friends. And then I was trying to act smart. It was just never a good idea. And I said, well, you're like Kubrick, that you'll hold a shot the way he will. Like the scene in 2001 when the astronauts are in the life pod, you do that in the Quaalude scene in Modern Romance where it's one continuous shot. And you go, no, that's Hal not blinking. Humans blink and Hal doesn't blink. That's what that scene is. I'm like, no, I know. Yeah, I know. I was just lying before to see if you were listening. Yeah, just terrifyingly intelligent.
It also is fun to watch Albert to see how much he does keep the camera on himself. You know what I mean? Like there'll be just like other people talking and you're just still looking at Albert.
Yeah.
It kills me.
You can't take your eyes off him. There's just so much going on.
Yeah.
But no, again, like you talk about jokes that you could never tell today.
Yeah.
If you've seen Modern Romance.
Yes.
No way a back that hairy would be allowed on a movie screen today. He looks like an escaped chimp in one scene.
And he's a young man.
He's a
at
young
the
man.
time.
He's quite hirsute.
Yeah. But that's the world that you're into now, and you have written, and now, of course...
you become a comedian, you become successful, and then you get these deals. Everybody wants to make Seinfeld with you in it.
Right.
And during the heyday of the 90s, I did a lot. As I've said before, I've had my hand in more failed pilots than an Air Force proctologist. And, Dana was one. Dana was one. There was one called Nice Try. That I now refer to as the aptly named Nice Try, but the guy that created that went on to create Malcolm in the Middle. So once he got rid of me, he found his shtick, and I got tired of writing. I got tired of sitting down with writers and explaining to them how I was funny, and so I said, I'm just going to write one. I just took the script for Nice Try, and I just said, all right, it's these many pages to Act 1, and these many pages to Act 2, and these many pages to Act 3. So, and then I wrote a pilot, and it ended up getting made. It was called World on a String, and it was basically Seinfeld in the world of Pee-wee's Playhouse. It was a traditional sitcom stuck in this sort of children's show reality, but the problems were not children's show problems. There were genuine adult problems in this hyper world. Like, a guy thinks his girlfriend might be pregnant, and he's going to go to her house and try to get the stick out of the garbage to see if she's pregnant or not. But a weird creature comes out of the sink and takes his car keys. It was that kind of hyper real. And it didn't get made. It did get made. It didn't go to series, but I found that I really enjoyed the writing process. I thought, well, this is just as good. And then George Meyer, who was a fan of my stand-up, I was one of the giant writers on The Simpsons, said, would you want to come in and just like a day or two a week and just punch up jokes for us? And I was so dumb at the time. I was like, yes, but I can only do it on Monday or Tuesday. I can't, because I'm still going on the road. So I was like, yeah, I'll work on The Simpsons if you meet my...
Yeah, right. Because I got to be in Akron.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to go to Uncle Lucky's Chuckle Barn. Wouldn't want to miss that. And then I did that, and I really loved it. And then after about 6 months, Mike Scully, who was running the show, came in one day, and he said, I think your contract is up. And I was literally gathering up my stuff like, I'm so sorry. And he just went, you want to just come every day? And I went, yeah. And he went, all right, I'll call your agent. And then he went, sucker, walked out. And that's how I became a writer on the show, and I was there for 7 years.
And that's a completely different life than what you've been doing.
Yeah, but it was perfect for me because I'd been a stand-up comedian since I was 17. I'd done all of that. I had just gotten married. I'd just bought a house. My wife had a big job. She was an agent. And I get to be an adult for 7 years. I was like, oh, this is great. My wife and I both have big jobs. We get invited to a lot of shishi parties. We have a nice house. We make a lot of money. I get up in the morning. I drive to work. I go to an office. I sit in the office. I go home. We watch TV together. It was really great for a while. And then one day you just go, this is not my beautiful life. And one day it became so great that I wanted to shoot myself.
Yeah. Because
I'm a carny.
Yes.
Yeah.
But, you're on the Dick Van Dyke Show for a while. You're in that room, which...
Funny story. His real name? Penis Van Lesbian. Not a lot of people
never knew that.
Yeah.
This is really insightful, and then it's just so educational. Now, but you're living in that world, hanging in a room with funny people.
Yeah. The funniest.
Yeah, the funniest. Yeah.
George Meyer specifically was terrifyingly funny. And that made me a much better stand-up, too, just being with people that are working at that level.
Right.
One day, we were doing what in The Simpsons, it's in a lot of things, it's called a Rube Goldberg, which is, I don't know why I'm saying that, but it's a very complicated series of things that happen. Like the game Operation when you were a kid. One thing leads to another thing, and 50 things happen. So Homer Simpson was on the top of a roof, and he fell off and hit not a balcony, but an awning, and then a series of awnings, and then onto a dump truck that lifted him up, and he slid down off the dump truck, and he ended up in the back of a dump truck. And we didn't know how to end it. And I'm telling you, 12 of the funniest people you'll ever meet in your life for an hour and a half staring at the ceiling. How can he get out of it? What can happen? What can happen? And just everything was tried, and there's nothing. And then George just goes, what if the dump truck is full of marshmallow fluff? And so he lands on the fluff, and he's safe. And then a bunch of scorpions come up out of the fluff and start stinging him. And I was just like, yeah, I would not have thought of that.
Yes.
You win.
Yeah.
George was the man who wrote he would write all the Ralph Wiggum, My Cat's Breath Smells Like Cat Food.
Yeah.
That's George. He's terrifyingly brilliant. Yeah. So, it's like it's like going on that writing staff is like sitting in with the Beatles. It's like,
sure.
I'm going to play too, guys, okay?
Right. It is
Count
like,
me in.
there's always that thing like you hear session musicians and you end up finding out they're on so many of your favorite albums, and that's how those kind of writers are.
It is. Funny, my friend's dad was the king of those. Tommy Tedesco was in the Wrecking Crew.
I had your friend on my
Denny.
show. Yeah, Denny.
Oh, yeah, well, then you know, yeah.
When it came out.
Yeah. I went to my friend's house, and there was a guitar on a frame on the wall, and I was like, what's that? He goes, oh, that's my dad's guitar. What did he play? He played Good Vibrations, God Only Knows, the Hawaii Five-0 theme, the Deer Hunter theme. Like on that.
Yeah, for 15 years, if you heard a record, he was on it,
His dad was the guitar. Yeah.
And also lived that kind of regular, I guess, L.A. life of...
in the valley, tiki hut in the backyard.
Yeah, that whole thing, but the daytime is like, I'm trying to really get Frank Sinatra to, finish this song.
There's a story of what a great guitarist he was. He was hired... The Ventures supposedly play the Hawaii Five-0 theme.
Yeah.
But the guy from the Ventures couldn't read music. So they called Tommy to come in and do it. And he comes in and goes, yeah, I can do it. And the Ventures are still there. So he looks at the shoe and he goes, okay, yeah, let's go. And he played it behind his back. He was just that good.
Yeah.
Good?
Yeah.
All right, thanks, guys.
And he honestly looked like anybody's dad. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And again,
and he did it, and he was a great. And I say this now I gauge this as a parent now. His kids are great. I mean,
right.
So he did a really good job because his kids aren't assholes, which is really the big goal.
That is the number one goal.
It is the number one goal.
Yeah.
Fred Trump. I just don't want my son to be an asshole.
What a job Fred did. It was amazing. But
Fred's up in wherever he is now with Hitler's dad, and Hitler's dad is going, well, I wouldn't have done that. That seems like you'd really mess him up if you did that.
Hitler's dad's so happy right now that there's someone else to take the heat.
Really?
Yeah, I fucked up, but this guy. This guy.
Hitler's dad's walking around hell with Fred Trump, and Hitler's dad's wearing an I'm with stupid t-shirt.
But again, that going back, that's a remarkable thing that your life has come together with those kind of stories.
Yeah, I'm very appreciative of it.
Yeah.
And then the greatest thing, like as we said, like I loved horror movies, and I became a TV writer, and then I never stopped doing stand-up. But The Simpsons took whatever momentum I had in my stand-up career, which was not insignificant. And I had story. I got close out. I was really close to the great things. It's like I don't have a successful career, but I have so many interesting failures. Early '90s, I'm called. I was like, you and these other guys are the final auditions for Saturday Night Live, and it's down to you and these groups. So me and these two guys are in L.A. and we're going to fly to Chicago, and Lauren's going to come and see you, and we'll find out. So I go, okay. So we go to, and this is the God's truth, and I on my daughter's soul. I'm not even going to put my own at risk. Put my daughter's at risk. I go to Chicago. The first guy goes on stage. No, first guy goes on stage did okay. No, I went on first. I got to get this right. It's my daughter's soul. She might end up with Fred Trump if I'm not careful. I went on stage and just crushed. I just had the set of my life. It was like the building was in a slightly different spot when I was done. The other guy came up, didn't do that well. Did okay, but not that well. The third guy kind of just screwed around. And, and I'm flying back with them the next day, and we're on the plane, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm going on Saturday Night Live. This is insane. And then I go immediately in my mind to, what about my apartment? Do I buy boxes? Do I rent? Do I sublet it? But I like my apartment. But I immediately went to the most mundane thing. And looking at the other two guys going, Chris Rock, Adam Sandler, you'll get your moment. This is my time. Don't get too close to my exhaust. And so I told that story for years. Mm-hmm. And then my wife is now an executive at HBO. And she goes to New York to see Chris Rock in a play, and she has dinner with Chris after. And she comes back and she goes, you know that story you tell about Saturday Night Live? And I go, yeah. She goes, it's true. And I go, what? And she goes, Chris Rock at dinner told the same exact story, word for word what you said. And I was like, of course it's true. Do you think I've been lying for 14 years? If I was with you and I knew you were lying, I'd say something about it later. You didn't parachute out of one of the jets on 9/11. Oh, I know, but Carol was talking about making her own curtains, and I had to say something. You were never on the space shuttle.
But that all came down to what one guy was looking for.
Yeah, no, I never regret. No, I never had a problem with that. Yeah. I don't think I'd have done well on that show, and they did phenomenally well. And you know the torturous point I was getting to is after all those things, one day I just had this. I was just sitting working on something, and I just wanted something, and I did all of these pilots that are very traditional pilots, helping out dad, tin full of biscuits, who's got my butter, all these awful glop. For which I cashed checks. And one day I thought, what would I want to watch? I did a pilot called Nolan Knows Best, which was basically, what if my dad had to live with my wife and I and our kids? Because as I've described my dad, he's Archie Bunker without the elegance and sophistication. So we did it. Brian Denny, he played him. He was brilliant. Got made. It didn't go to series, but I had this itch. Like, that's such a good... And seeing Brian do it, I was like, I know that works. I know that character works. And then I thought, but I want to make a horror show. Like, if I could make any show to watch, I would make The X-Files. That's what I watch, or The Night Stalker, which is a reference. That's the stuff that I like. I don't watch Friends. I don't watch Seinfeld. I watch Star Trek and The Night Stalker. So I thought, well, what if I wrote The Night Stalker or The X-Files, and then just put my dad in the middle of it, and just had this character from a sitcom that did not belong in that world at all, but everybody had to deal with him. And I thought, yeah, I'll just do this as a digital thing just for fun. I can have my friends. I'm friends with the people that do the makeup on The Walking Dead. I said, can you make me look 70? And they went, yeah, easy. And they did a test and it worked. And I thought, I'll just make this as a little digital thing, and it'll be fun to do. And then I had lunch with Pete Aronson, who works at IFC, who's just a friend of mine. And we were just catching up because I had gotten divorced and we hadn't spoken for a while. And he was just checking in as friends do. And he just said kind of casually, he's like, you should write a funny X-Files. You should do something like that. And I literally said, I just did. I literally just did. And he's like, oh, what? And I pitched it to him and he went, well, I don't know. If you can change A to B and B to Z, that sounds like something we'd like. But you'd have to change these couple things. And I went home and I did it, and I went back and I pitched it to him, and they bought it in the room, and it became Stand Against Evil, and I finally got a TV show. Yeah, literally because I stopped trying. because I was not trying to get a TV show. I just made this for myself to do. And it's just, this is going to sound maybe a little too old school. TV shows are like women. If they see you trying, all the air goes out of it. Mm-hmm. If you don't, it's like, all right, he doesn't care. Let's go out with him. He doesn't want this. Let's give it to him.
But it's one thing to think up this bizarre show, but it's got to be strange to you to sit there and watch these people bring it to life.
It's surreal. And it just, this is just something that I thought up in my kitchen wearing, a bra and panties. But no, it's Janet Varney, it's John McGinley plays Stan Miller, the sheriff in a small New England town who's been hunted. There's a curse on this town that every sheriff dies young. Because the constable in the 1600s burned 172 people at the stake for witchcraft, and they put a curse on the town to kill every constable. And so every sheriff the town has ever had dies very young. John's character, Stan Miller, was not killed. And what we find out in the pilot is because his wife knew about the curse and would go out at night and kill all the demons that were trying to kill him. And so he didn't have to deal with it. But his wife dies of a heart attack, and now he's just left alone. And immediately he's beset upon by demons, and he throws a big fit at his wife's funeral because there are demons there that only he can see that other people can't. And he's cashiered out. And new sheriff comes in, who's this young woman that he's more outraged that he's been replaced by a woman than the fact that demons from another dimension want to kill him. So these two people have to team up and fight these demons every week. And Janet Varney, who plays his sidekick, Evie Barrett, or the co-star, I should say, in the pilot, this witch throws up a bunch of black stuff on her. So we're in a swamp in Georgia at 2 a.m, and it's a real swamp. And we had to have the snake wrangler go walk the set first to make sure there's no cottonmouths or anything. And then the actor that plays the witch has like a tube coming out of the side of his mouth and a tank of stuff, and you just compress it, and the stuff would shoot all this black stuff into Janet's face. And I just walked up to her and I went, I'm really, really sorry. Because it's like you think about it and it'll be funny, and then you realize, now you're going to do this to your friend. It's like, but it's so much fun. You get to design monsters, and they build the suit, and they.
And it's kind of old school when it comes to that too, right? It's like closer to.
Yeah, it suits. I mean, we have digital stuff, but I didn't want it to look like. I can tell when it's fake all the time, and I wanted it to look like the show that I would grow up watching. I wanted it to look like it was a really funny episode of The Night Gallery. Like I wanted it to look like it took place kind of in the 70s. They have cell phones and everything, but there's a very 70s kind of feel to it. Its pace is slow. The music is of that era. I just wanted it to feel a little alien and a little off. And then I wanted the creatures to all be organic. I wanted them to be makeup or giant puppets or whatever, right? Because that stuff has to be unquestionable if the comedy is going to work.
Right.
And that's just a weird... Comedy and horror are cousins. The screaming and laughing do the same thing. They're involuntary reflexes that release tension. So comedy and horror are created in that way. And they both require separate but equal suspensions of disbelief. And so you have to be careful where one goes, where the one doesn't go. There are 100 ways to do it wrong. Yeah.
And if you don't have a great actor in John McGinley, then all of it falls apart.
Yeah.
But there's something about him, because
he takes it incredibly seriously.
Yes.
Like if he was winking at the camera, none of it would work.
Right.
He buys it. And he asked me questions. Like the first meeting I had with John, he was like, so what was this guy's relationship with his wife? And I was like, I don't know.
Yeah,
I had her die. That's all.
She's not really here.
I didn't want to have to deal with her.
Yeah,
and he was like, "No, I got to know. I have to know." So I had to create this. It wasn't difficult, but I had to create this sort of this is how they met, and this is what she is to him, and he took all that, and because he invested this character with so much humanity that was not in my script. it forced me to be a much better writer, just to write up to his performing.
Until you told me that, I didn't even realize what he's carrying too. He seems like a widower. He seems like somebody who, it's a comedy horror, but this guy's carrying around this pain.
Yeah, and I thought, the way I envisioned it, they come back from the funeral and make a sandwich and life goes on.
Right, yeah.
And no, that's not how it goes. That's not how it goes. And in the first season of the series ended with Janet's character Evie Barrett getting traded out with somebody from the 1600s by the spell, and now she's in the 1600s about to be burned at the stake. And then we cut back to John going like, something's not right, because he now lives in a world where she died 400 years ago. And so in the first episode of the first season, John is now the town crazy guy. He calls everybody Evie. He keeps hearing her and seeing her, but nobody knows who this person is. And he has to go find out what happened, how to fix it. I don't think it's a big spoiler alert to say my co-star doesn't die in the first episode. He rescues, he's able to extricate Evie from the situation, but then he realizes, well, if I can go back 400 years and save your life, I can go back 1 year and save my wife's life. But to do that, he has to make deals with these demons and things that he shouldn't be doing deals with. And also, if he saves his wife's life, then he never meets Evie because he never has to retire and she doesn't have to move there. So there's a lot of moving parts to this. And so the entire season, John's playing a double game where he's helping Evie kill these demons and he's on the side cutting deals to learn what he needs to learn to go back in time. And he does at the end of the season. But as I say, it's the law of unintended consequences. When you do something like that, it never goes the way you want it to.
It's hard to believe that you could keep all those balls in the air with that and then still be releasing a comedy album at the same time. It's like there is something insatiable going on with
Well, I also think that they both feed off each other. The comedy album, but going up on stage allows me to just get away from all that.
Right.
And just like, bah. Yeah. And then the show allows me to kind of be an adult and buckle down and do my work. And, tonight I like to stay busy. The album's out today. Tonight I'm going to the Littlefield Theater in Brooklyn to do Plan 9 from Outer Space live with a bunch of friends of mine as a reading. And then tomorrow I go back to LA and go to work on some other things. And, I like to stay busy. I don't have a lot of other hobbies.
Right, but
I've never met my children, so that helps.
Yes, they seem nice from the pictures.
I keep telling them, they just keep missing me.
Yeah,
no, they're great.
It all sounds so fun, but I remember when Robin Williams passed away, you wrote that piece about the comedy mind, and I was always wondered, had you heard from anybody from any kind of medical background or psychological background?
Well, there's the people I pay.
Yeah.
I take anti-anxiety medication, and I joke about it. I joke about it in the album. There, people go, well, some of my more like homeopathic friends are like, well, you're still feeling your anxiety. You're just masking it with medication. It's like, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what it says on the label. In the winter, I feel the cold. I mask it with a coat. Because I'm a coward.
Yeah.
Robin and I actually were pretty friendly. And I knew what was going on with him physically and mentally. Robin was not just depressed. Robin had Lowe's body dementia, which came as a side effect of his Parkinson's disease. And he quite literally, his brain physiognomy had changed. He was quite literally not himself. And so you can't push rational thought onto an irrational mind. You can't go, well, why don't you just call somebody? That's like, get up out of your wheelchair. It's much better to walk. He couldn't, or he would have. But I never had a serious conversation about the fact that, and I talk about it, because I've had a couple of good old nervous breakdowns. I've had about 3 really good ones. And with me, I won't sleep for like a week. And and then you're crazy. Then you're just crazy. And the fear of not sleeping metastasizes,
Sure.
and then it becomes worse. Than the symptom overtakes the disease, and it's I have to be very careful about my emotional and mental hygiene, that I don't let myself get into a situation where I open myself to getting in trouble. And so I have to be very vigilant, and I almost said diligent, which would have been, you know what they say, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade, and when life gives you melons, get checked for dyslexia. But so, yeah, what I used to say was like the same brain that makes the good stuff makes the bad stuff.
Yeah.
And you have to, the same vigorous creative mind can also create horrible self-inflicted wounds, and you just have to be really, really careful about it. And also, because of the life of a stand-up comedian, if that's all you do, is also a cauldron for that. You're alone all the time. You travel alone, you live alone, you work alone, you're on stage in a light, you're not intimate with anybody. You go home alone if you look like me. It breeds getting into your own head and shutting down, which is the thing you can't do.
That was an amazing piece that you wrote too, and it hit me at just that time that it came out, because you had brought up that you lost many friends from the comedy field.
Many.
Yeah,
like 5.
Yeah,
all to suicides.
Yeah, and suicides, and not the other kind of, which is just like living so crazy that you
it's
die
not
young.
it's not like I know a lot of musicians and they lose all their friends to drug overdoses.
Yeah,
comedians lose all their friends to suicides.
Yeah,
and it is a chicken and the egg. It's like why do comedians kill themselves? I don't think that's it. I think that people that have a predilection to suicide also have a mental makeup that allows them to be creative in a way that stand-up comedy is very appealing.
Would you trade it? Would you trade your creative mind for a life of like ease?
I've thought about it. Well, I tried it. I had a great normal life for like 7 years on The Simpsons, basically. I got, and at the end, I just couldn't do it anymore. Yeah. And my wife and I were at a party, and someone came up to me and said, "Are you Dana Gould?" And I said, "I used to be."
Yeah.
And my wife said, "You have to get out." And she did. Said, "You have to stop. You have to get out." And then I got out and got more depressed, and we got divorced.
So it all worked out.
All
perfectly.
worked out for her. All worked out for her. No, we're awesome friends. I have the least comedically rewarding divorce on the planet. She's a good egg.
I'll wrap this up the way I started. Congratulations on the show. And
Thanks
I'm glad
very much.
That you're doing well with it.
Yeah.
And your stand-up album,
Mr. Funny Man,
is out
today.
Thank you so much, Dana. Take care, my friend. That was great. Dana Gould, everybody.